Please don't leave. The little black girl cried to the biker as the streetlights flickered like a warning sign. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It's a cold, quiet night, and the streetlights flicker like a warning sign. The wind blows through the empty streets, carrying the sound of distant traffic. The air feels thick with tension, like something big is about to happen. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps breaks the silence. A little girl, no older than 8 or 9, appears from the shadows, her face streaked with tears. She's barefoot, her small feet scraped and bruised from running. Her clothes are torn, her braids flying wildly behind her as she stumbles down the street, her eyes wide with fear. She runs straight to a group of bikers parked at the side of the road, their Harleys lined up like beasts waiting for their next command. "Please, don't leave me," she cries, clutching at one of the bikers' jackets. Her voice trembles with desperation, her tiny body shaking with fear. The bikers, all rough-looking men with tattoos and leather vests, exchange confused glances. They've seen a lot in their lives, but nothing like this. The girl's eyes are filled with terror, and it's clear she's been through something unimaginable. "What's wrong, kid?" One of them, a grizzled biker with a long beard, asks, his voice surprisingly gentle. The girl looks up at him, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. They're going to take me," she whispers, her voice barely audible over the hum of the motorcycles. "Please, don't leave me." The bikers look at each other, the weight of the situation settling in. They've been through plenty of fights, countless miles on the road, but this is different. They weren't expecting to be in the middle of a child's desperate plea for help. The biker with the long beard kneels down to her level, his expression softening. "Who's after you, kid?" he asks, his tone serious. The little girl looks around nervously, as if making sure no one is watching. "My stepdad and his friends," she says, her voice shaking. "They're looking for me. They want to take me back." The bikers exchange uneasy glances. They've dealt with a lot over the years, but kidnapping a child? That's a whole different ballgame. "Where's your mom?" the biker asks gently. The girl's eyes fill with fresh tears, and she shakes her head. She's gone," she whispers, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do. I'm all alone." The biker's heart sinks. He looks at the others, their expressions grim. They've heard enough. "All right, kid," he says, standing up. "We're not going anywhere. You're safe with us now." The bikers start their engines, the sound roaring to life like thunder in the night. The little girl, still clutching the biker's jacket, looks up at them with a mix of hope and disbelief. She never expected that these rough, intimidating men would be her saviors. But now, as they prepare to ride, she feels a sense of safety she hasn't felt in a long time. The bikers exchange final glances, nodding to each other. This is no longer just a ride. This is a mission. They're going to make sure that little girl gets the protection she deserves. And they'll stop at nothing to make sure her stepdad and his friends never lay a hand on her again. As the bikers pull away into the night, the streetlights continue to flicker, casting long shadows on the road ahead. But this time, those shadows no longer seem so ominous. The bikers are here, and they won't let anyone hurt this little girl. The roar of the motorcycles echoes through the quiet streets, their headlights cutting through the darkness like a trail of fire. The little girl, still clutching the biker's jacket, sits in front of Jack, the leader of the group, her face pressed against his back. She's scared, but as they ride, she can feel the rhythm of the engines and the steady confidence of the bikers around her. And for the first time in what feels like forever, she feels safe. Jack glances over his shoulder at her, his voice calm but firm. "Hold on tight, kid. We're going to get you through this." The little girl nods, squeezing his waist, tighter as the wind whips around them, but she doesn't say a word. The city fades behind them, and the vast emptiness of the highway stretches out in front. The road to freedom is long, and the night air feels colder with each passing mile. Jack feels the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. He knows what's at stake here, but he also knows they can't stop. The road ahead is the only thing that matters now, and the safety of this little girl is in their hands. As they ride through the night, Jack's thoughts drift back to the promise he made to his old friend, the one who saved his life on the battlefield. Tyrone's daughter, Maya, was his responsibility now, and no matter what it took, Jack was going to make sure she was safe. The further they ride, the more the night seems to close in around them. The engine of Jack's bike purrs steadily beneath him, but in the silence between the bikers, the weight of the situation hangs heavy. Maya's stepfather, the cop, is dangerous. He's got the law on his side, and Jack knows they're pushing the limits of what's legal here. But none of that matters right now. What matters is keeping Maya safe, and they're not going to let anyone take her from them. The group of bikers moves in perfect formation, their bikes roaring like thunder as they cut through the night. Jack leads the way, his mind sharp and focused. They don't know what's waiting for them at the end of this road, but he's prepared to face it head-on. As they approach a small town, the first hint of dawn begins to break on the horizon. The sky shifts from dark to light, casting long shadows across the empty streets. They're getting closer now, and Jack can feel the tension rising in the air. They're almost there. But just as the light of day begins to creep in, Jack's phone buzzes in his pocket. He pulls over to the side of the road, signaling the rest of the group to stop. His fingers move quickly over the screen as he answers the call. It's Elena, the social worker at the hospital. Jack, we've got a problem. Elena's voice crackles through the phone. Maya's stepfather, he's here. He's demanding to take her home. Jack's jaw tightens. He looks at the group of bikers, who are all watching him, waiting for his next move. Tell me exactly where you are, he says, his voice steady. Elena gives him the hospital's location, and Jack hangs up. He looks at his crew and gives them a nod. We're going in, he says. The bikers rev their engines, the sound rising into the morning air. There's no time to waste. They've come this far, and they're not backing down now. They head towards the hospital, their bikes cutting through the streets like a pack of wolves on the hunt. The closer they get, the more Jack feels the tension building. He can already see it, the confrontation waiting for them. But he knows they can't afford to back down. Not now. Not when Maya's life is on the line. As they approach the hospital, the doors slide open, and Jack leads the way inside. He can feel the eyes of the hospital staff on them as they walk through the lobby. The nurses stand frozen, unsure of what to do. The security guards eye them warily, but no one dares to stop them. Jack walks straight up to the reception desk, his boots clicking loudly on the polished floor. I'm here to see Maya Jenkins, he says, his voice calm but commanding. The receptionist hesitates, looking at the biker's leather vest, then at the rest of the group behind him. She doesn't ask any questions. Room 412, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nods and turns towards the elevator. The rest of the bikers follow in a tight formation, their presence filling the space with an undeniable energy. As they ride the elevator up to the 4th floor, Jack can feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. He's not sure what to expect when they get there, but he knows one thing for sure. Maya is not leaving that hospital with her stepfather. Not if he can help it. The elevator dings, and the doors open to a quiet hospital floor. Jack steps out first, scanning the hallway. There are 2 police officers standing near a door, their hands resting casually on their belts. They glance at him, but don't move. Jack takes a deep breath and steps forward, the rest of the group following close behind. When they reach the door to Maya's room, Jack stops. He looks back at his crew, making sure everyone is in position. This is it. This is the moment. He pushes the door open, his heart pounding in his chest. The door creaked open, and Jack stepped into the room, his boots echoing on the polished floor of the hospital hallway. His eyes scanned the sterile space, landing on the figure lying in the bed. Maya, the little girl who had haunted his thoughts ever since that phone call, lay there, her small body bruised and battered, a far cry from the innocent child she once was. She looked up at him with wide eyes, her face streaked with tears, and for a moment, Jack's heart ached for her. He had promised Tyrone, her father, that he would keep her safe, but seeing her like this, the reality of the promise hit him harder than he expected. Behind him, the other bikers stood still, their presence filling the room like an unspoken vow of protection. Maya's stepfather, Officer Patrick Donovan, stood by the window, his back to them. He turned when he heard the door open, his face hardening when he saw Jack and the bikers. The tension in the room was palpable, and Jack could feel the air growing thick with the unspoken animosity between them. "What are you doing here?" Donovan's voice was cold, but there was a hint of unease in his eyes. Jack didn't flinch. "I'm here to take her home," he said firmly. Donovan sneered, his hand subtly resting on the holster at his side. "She's not going anywhere with you. I have legal custody." "You're not taking her anywhere," Jack shot back, his voice steady but filled with authority. The tension crackled between them, a standoff of power and control. Maya, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of fear and hope, finally spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, don't let him take me," she said, her small hands clutching the blanket tightly. Jack's heart broke at the sound of her words. He took a step forward, his eyes softening as he knelt beside her. "Maya, you're safe now," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're not going to let him hurt you again." Donovan's eyes flickered with something close to anger, but he didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest, watching them closely. Jack could see the calculating look in his eyes, and he knew that Donovan wasn't going to let go without a fight. He straightened, his voice dropping an octave. "You've got no right to do this. I know what you've been doing to her," Jack said, his words sharp as a knife. Donovan's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Jack stood tall, his eyes never leaving Donovan's. "I don't care what your badge says. You're not walking out of here with her." The room fell into a tense silence. Jack could feel the weight of his words settling in, but he wasn't backing down. He had made a promise to Tyrone, and he was going to keep it, no matter what. Maya looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears, but also a flicker of hope. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she could feel the strength and determination radiating from Jack and the bikers around her. She had never felt this safe before, not even with her stepfather's promises. But now, in this moment, she knew that these men, these bikers, would protect her. Jack turned back to his crew, giving them a silent nod. Without a word, they moved into action, surrounding Donovan, their presence intimidating but controlled. No one was going to stop them from taking Maya. "This ends here," Jack said, his voice low and unwavering. "She's coming with us, and you're not stopping her." Donovan took a deep breath, his eyes flicking between Jack and the bikers. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to argue, but then something in his expression changed. The tension in the room thickened, and Jack knew they were at a breaking point. "If you try to take her," Donovan finally said, his voice tight, "you'll regret it." Jack didn't flinch. "I don't think so," he said, his tone unshakable. "Now step aside." The confrontation was about to reach its peak. Maya's future, her safety, depended on the decision made in this room. Jack wasn't going to let her down. He stepped forward, his hand outstretched, and Donovan hesitated for just a second. That was all it took. The bikers moved swiftly, their presence overwhelming. They surrounded Donovan, not with violence, but with the sheer force of determination. "You're done," one of the bikers muttered under his breath. Donovan, realizing that he was outmatched, took a step back. He didn't say another word. Jack reached for Maya's hand, helping her out of the bed. "It's time to go," he said softly. She nodded, a quiet sob escaping her lips as she finally let go of the fear that had held her captive for so long. With one last glance at the defeated stepfather, Jack led her out of the room, the rest of the bikers following closely behind. They were leaving the hospital, leaving the past behind them. But as they walked down the hall, Jack knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead was still dangerous, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like they had a chance. Maya was safe, and they weren't stopping until she was free. As Jack and the bikers moved through the hospital hallway, Maya's hand still tightly clutched in his. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Every step they took toward the exit seemed to echo in his mind, the weight of their mission pressing down on him. The moment they stepped outside, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the quiet street. Jack could feel the urgency in the air. They had to get Maya as far away from here as possible. Every second counted. The rest of the bikers followed them out, the rumble of their engines a comforting sound as they gathered around their bikes, ready to move. Maya hesitated for a moment, looking back at the hospital where she had spent the last few days in fear, but then she glanced up at Jack. He gave her a reassuring smile, though he couldn't deny the concern in his eyes. "You're safe now," he said gently, helping her onto the back of his bike. She nodded, though her grip on him tightened as they started to ride. The journey ahead was uncertain, but at least for now, they were free. Jack could feel the weight of his promise to Tyrone hanging over him. He had sworn to protect Maya, and now it was more than just a promise. It was a responsibility he wasn't about to let go of. The group of bikers formed up behind him, a wall of leather and steel as they sped down the highway. The wind whipped around them, and Jack's thoughts raced as fast as the road beneath him. They had no idea where Donovan was, or what he would do next. The hospital incident had only been the beginning. Jack knew that the real danger was still ahead. As they rode, he could feel Maya's small body pressing against his back, her arms wrapped around his waist. She was trembling, but Jack could tell she was trying to be brave. She had been through so much already, but now, in this moment, she was safe with him, and he would make sure it stayed that way. They continued on for hours, the landscape around them shifting from the city to the open roads of the countryside. Jack could feel the tension beginning to ease, but he knew they couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. Maya's stepfather wasn't going to give up easily. He had connections, and he was relentless. Jack's thoughts turned to their next move. He had to get Maya somewhere safe, somewhere her stepfather couldn't find her. He needed to get her to a place where she could heal and feel protected. As they reached a small town, Jack spotted a diner on the side of the road. He slowed down and pulled into the parking lot, signaling the rest of the bikers to follow. They all dismounted, and Jack helped Maya off the bike. "Let's grab something to eat," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. Maya nodded, though she looked around nervously, still unsure of what was happening. Jack led her into the diner, where the group of bikers drew some curious looks from the patrons. But Jack wasn't concerned with the stares. He just wanted to make sure Maya was okay. The waitress greeted them with a smile, though she seemed surprised by the group of bikers walking in. "What can I get you all?" she asked. Jack nodded. "We'll have some coffee, and whatever you've got that's hot. And some food for the kid," he added, glancing down at Maya. She was still looking around, her eyes wide with uncertainty. As the waitress went off to prepare the food, Jack sat down at a booth, keeping a watchful eye on the door. He didn't trust that they were safe yet. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. This wasn't just about protecting Maya anymore. It was about keeping them all safe from someone who had the power to ruin their lives. As the food arrived, Jack set a plate in front of Maya, who hadn't said much since they left the hospital. She looked down at the plate of pancakes in front of her, then up at Jack, her eyes filled with gratitude and sadness. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're welcome, Maya," he said softly. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." The rest of the bikers sat around the table, eating and talking quietly, but Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They had come so far, but they weren't out of danger yet. He knew it wouldn't be long before Donovan came looking for them. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his thoughts. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen. It was a text from the lawyer who had been helping them with the situation. "I've got good news. We can start proceedings to get custody of Maya, but it'll be a fight." Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was what they needed. It wasn't a guaranteed win, but it was a start. "We'll take it one step at a time," Jack muttered under his breath. He looked up at Maya, who was still eating her pancakes, though now her face had a hint of hope. It was small, but it was there. The road ahead would be hard, but they were on the right path now. Jack could feel it in his bones. They were going to win this fight. They were going to keep Maya safe, and no one was going to take her away from them. But as he looked out the window, he couldn't shake the feeling that Donovan was closing in. The real battle was just beginning. The sound of the motorcycle engines roared through the quiet town as Jack and the bikers made their way back onto the road. They had been on the run for hours now, and the rising sun provided no comfort. Only a reminder that they were still vulnerable, still in danger. As the road stretched out before them, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. Maya, riding behind him, was safe for now, but they weren't out of the woods yet. Not by a long shot. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket again, this time a call. He answered without hesitation, his eyes still focused on the road ahead. "Jack," came the voice on the other end. It was Derek, the lawyer they had been working with. "The situation's worse than we thought." Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Donovan's lawyer is pulling every string they can to block the custody proceedings. They've already got connections within Child Protective Services, and they're going to drag this out as long as possible. I'm telling you, Jack, this could get ugly. Jack's jaw clenched. He had known the legal battle wouldn't be easy, but hearing it from Derek made it all feel too real. We need to get Maya as far away from him as possible, Jack muttered, his mind racing with options. If we can just get through this, get her safe, that's all that matters right now. You've got to stay ahead of them, Derek warned. Donovan's going to be looking for any reason to get the courts to hand her back over to him. We need to move fast. Jack hung up, his eyes scanning the road in front of him, the weight of the responsibility heavier than ever. He could feel Maya's small hands gripping his waist, her body pressed against his back. She was still quiet, but Jack knew she was scared. She had to be. After all, her entire life had been turned upside down in just a few days. They had driven for hours, but Jack could tell that Maya was tired, exhausted, even. She had been through so much, and he couldn't help but wonder how much more she could handle. But he also knew one thing for sure. He couldn't stop now. Not until she was safe. We're going to keep going, Jack said to the group, his voice firm. We'll stop when we need to, but for now, we keep moving. We don't give Donovan any time to catch up. The bikers nodded in agreement, their engines growling to life again as they set off down the highway. The open road stretched ahead, endless and unforgiving, but Jack knew they had no other choice. Maya's safety depended on it. As they drove, Jack could feel the weight of the situation settling in even more. Every mile that passed brought them closer to the confrontation that was inevitable. But the bikers were ready. They had come this far, and they weren't about to stop now. We'll make it through this, Jack thought to himself, his eyes narrowing against the wind. The sun was high now, and the group had traveled hundreds of miles, heading further away from the city and the chaos that had followed them. The landscape outside the window changed, rolling hills and farmland replacing the city streets, but Jack couldn't relax. He knew they had to stay vigilant. They had to be prepared for anything. As they approached another small town, Jack signaled for a stop. He pulled into a gas station, and the bikers parked in a line, their motorcycles almost blending into the surroundings. Jack dismounted first, looking around warily. The area seemed quiet, too quiet. He could feel eyes on him from every direction, but he couldn't afford to be paranoid. Not yet. The rest of the bikers followed, and Jack led the group into the gas station. Maya, still looking weary, stayed close to him, her eyes scanning the area as she walked. We're just going to take a quick break, Jack said softly to her, trying to reassure her even though he knew there was little he could do to ease her fear. As they entered the store, the bell above the door jingled, and the cashier looked up, a friendly smile on his face. What can I get for you guys? He asked. Jack could tell the man was used to seeing bikers stop in, but something about the smile didn't feel genuine. It was as if he was waiting for something, watching them too closely. Jack's instincts flared. We'll take some coffee and water for the kid, he replied, keeping his tone neutral. The cashier nodded and went to grab the drinks. Jack glanced around, his eyes flicking to the door, the windows, any potential threat. The bikers were already talking amongst themselves, checking their bikes, scanning the lot. Maya stood quietly next to Jack, still clutching his jacket. You okay? Jack asked her softly. She nodded, but Jack could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She hadn't had a moment to process everything that had happened. She was still just a little girl, caught in a world of adults fighting for her safety. The cashier returned with their drinks, and Jack handed him the cash, glancing one last time at the door. He wasn't sure why, but something about this place felt off. Thanks, Jack muttered, taking the drinks and leading Maya back outside. The group of bikers was already starting their bikes, ready to move again. As they revved up, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't the first time he'd had that feeling, and he knew better than to ignore it. As they got back on the road, Jack's mind raced. What if they were being followed? What if Donovan had already tracked them? He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not now. The bikers fell into formation again, heading down the road, and Jack's thoughts turned to the next step. They had to get to the next safe house. They had to stay one step ahead. As they drove into the evening, the sun sinking low in the sky, Jack kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, waiting for the next move. They had no choice but to keep going. The battle wasn't over yet, but Jack wasn't about to let Donovan win. Not while Maya's safety was on the line. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of purple and dark blue, as the group of bikers continued their journey down the endless highway. The wind was biting, but Jack didn't feel it. His mind was focused on the road ahead. The highway stretched out in front of them like a never-ending ribbon of asphalt, and as the miles passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every sound, every shift of the wind, made him tense. The promise to Tyrone echoed in his mind. He had sworn to protect Maya, and he wasn't going to let anything stop him. Maya was still quiet behind him, her small hands holding tightly onto his waist. He hadn't heard her say much since they left the diner, and he knew she was still processing everything. She had gone from a life of fear to one of uncertainty, with only a group of bikers as her protectors. Jack knew it wasn't ideal, but it was the best they could do right now. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held herself, as though she was bracing for something, anything. He hated that feeling. No child should have to live in fear like this, not when they had so much potential for a bright future. He would fight, do whatever it took to make sure Maya's future was hers to choose. The sound of engines roaring behind him snapped Jack out of his thoughts. He glanced in the rearview mirror, and the sight made his stomach tighten. The same black SUV he had seen earlier was back, this time closer than before. Jack's heart rate picked up. He hadn't expected Donovan to come after them this quickly, but he knew one thing for sure. They weren't going to make it easy for him. He signaled to the rest of the bikers, and they all began to accelerate, their bikes roaring to life, the speed picking up as they raced ahead. Jack's mind was racing, calculating their next move. He couldn't let Donovan catch up to them. Not now. The night was dark, and the road twisted and turned through the hills, but Jack kept his focus sharp. He needed to lose the SUV, get them off his tail, and find a place where they could regroup. After a few minutes of pushing the bikes to their limits, Jack saw an old gas station up ahead. It was a small, isolated place, exactly what they needed. He signaled to the others, and one by one, the bikers pulled into the lot, their engines cutting off in unison. Jack dismounted and looked around. The area was quiet, but he could feel the tension in the air. He turned to the rest of the group, giving them a quick nod. "We'll wait here. Stay alert. Maya, stay close to me," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. Maya nodded silently, her eyes wide, still filled with fear. Jack could see it in her face. She didn't want to show it, but she was terrified. He hated that she had to experience this. As the bikers gathered around, Jack's mind raced through the possibilities. There was no doubt in his mind now. Donovan was serious. He wasn't going to back off easily. Jack had to act fast. He looked over at Bear, a fellow biker who had been with him through thick and thin. "Bear, you and Clutch check the perimeter. The rest of you, stay ready." Bear gave a nod, and he and Clutch moved quickly to cover the surrounding area, their eyes scanning every corner. Jack turned to Maya, who was still standing beside him, looking unsure. He crouched down to her level, trying to offer her some reassurance. "It's going to be all right, Maya. I'm not going to let him hurt you." She nodded, but Jack could tell she wasn't convinced. She had been let down too many times before, and now, her entire world was upside down. He wasn't going to fail her, not like the others had. A few minutes later, Bear and Clutch returned, their expressions grim. "We've got company," Bear said quietly. Jack's heart sank. They hadn't been here long enough to settle in, and now Donovan had already caught up to them. "How many?" Jack asked, his voice steady. "2 vehicles. One's a black SUV. The other is an unmarked van," Bear replied. Jack's mind was already working, calculating the best course of action. They were trapped if they stayed here. The only way out was to keep moving. "All right, we're making a break for it," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "Everyone ready?" The bikers nodded, all of them preparing to mount up. "We need to get out of here now," Jack said. "Maya, stay close. We're going to ride fast and keep together. They're not getting you." Maya's eyes flickered with fear again, but she didn't speak. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, but she was starting to trust him, trust that he would protect her, no matter what. Jack signaled for everyone to mount up. The engines roared to life again as the bikers started their bikes, and within seconds, they were speeding down the road. Jack led the way, pushing the bike to its limit, the wind rushing past them as they shot through the night. The black SUV and the van weren't far behind, but Jack wasn't going to let them catch up. They had to get ahead, and fast. As they twisted and turned down winding roads, Jack's eyes never left the rearview mirror. He could see the headlights of the SUV in the distance, but they were slowly pulling further behind. His grip tightened on the handlebars as he pushed the bike harder. The speedometer climbed, the world around them a blur of lights and shadows. Jack's only thought was getting Maya away from this nightmare. A few miles down the road, Jack saw an exit sign up ahead, leading toward a rural town. It was their best shot. "Take the exit," Jack shouted over the roar of the engines. The bikers followed his lead, their tires screeching as they veered off the highway. Jack's eyes flicked between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, watching the vehicles trailing them. They had to lose them. Jack's hands gripped the handlebars tighter, the engines howling as they made their way towards safety, or at least, what Jack hoped would be safety. The sound of the motorcycles echoed through the empty roads as Jack and the bikers sped towards the rural town. The dark night had now fully settled, the only light coming from their headlights cutting through the fog. Jack's mind raced with thoughts of how they were going to get out of this mess. The SUV and the van had followed them off the highway, but Jack wasn't going to let them catch up. His grip tightened on the handlebars, the bike roaring beneath him as they made sharp turns down narrow streets. His eyes flicked back to the rearview mirror, seeing the distant lights of the vehicles behind them. They were still trailing, but Jack wasn't worried about that. He just needed to make sure they didn't lose control of the situation. The plan was simple. Get Maya out of danger, put miles between them and Donovan, and figure out their next move. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being cornered. Every turn they made seemed to bring them closer to an unavoidable confrontation. They had been running all day, with no real place to hide, no real plan for safety. But now, as the bikers cut through the fog-covered streets, Jack realized that they couldn't outrun Donovan forever. They needed to get to a place where they could think, regroup, and strategize. Jack saw a small diner up ahead. The neon sign flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding buildings. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He signaled for the others to follow, and one by one, the bikers pulled into the diner's parking lot. Jack stopped at the front, his mind already assessing the situation. The diner was quiet, the only sound coming from the hum of the neon sign. But Jack knew better than to let his guard down. Maya's safety was still the priority, and they had to keep moving. He glanced over at her. She was sitting on the back of his bike, still holding on to him, but now her grip was slightly looser, a small sign that she was starting to relax. Jack felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could make it through this. He dismounted and helped Maya off the bike, keeping a hand on her shoulder as they walked toward the diner. The rest of the bikers followed suit, their boots thudding on the pavement. As they stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled, but there was no one in sight. The diner was nearly empty, with just a few patrons scattered in the booths. The waitress, a woman in her 30s with a tired expression, looked up as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of the bikers. Jack nodded at her, keeping his voice calm. "We'll take a table in the back," he said. She hesitated for a moment, but then led them to a booth, setting down menus without a word. The bikers sat down, their eyes scanning the diner, ever watchful. Jack sat next to Maya, his eyes constantly shifting between her and the door. He needed to make sure nothing went wrong. The waitress returned a few moments later, her voice soft. "What can I get you?" she asked, her eyes lingering on Jack. He gave her a quick smile, trying to put her at ease, but he could tell she was nervous. "Coffee. And water for the kid," Jack replied, glancing down at Maya. Maya didn't say anything, just stared out the window, her face lost in thought. Jack wanted to say something to comfort her, but the words didn't come. He wasn't sure how to reassure her when he didn't even know what the next move would be. The waitress left, and Jack turned to his crew. "We need to lay low here for a while. Keep your eyes open. We don't know how long we have." His voice was firm, but Jack knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. They were still being hunted. After a few minutes, the waitress returned with their drinks, and Jack took a sip of his coffee, still keeping an eye on the door. As the silence stretched on, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, quickly checking the screen. It was a message from Derek, the lawyer. "I've got some updates. I found a place where we can get Maya out of the city. It's a temporary safe house, but it's the best option we have for now." Jack read the message twice, then set the phone down. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. "We're leaving in the morning," he said, his voice resolute. "Get some rest, everyone. We've got a long ride ahead." As the bikers relaxed, Jack glanced at Maya again. She had stopped staring out the window and was now looking at him, her face filled with quiet uncertainty. "I'm scared," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Jack's heart broke at the sound of her words, but he smiled at her, offering what little comfort he could. "You're safe with us now, Maya. We won't let anything happen to you," he said, his voice as steady as he could manage. Maya didn't say anything, but Jack could see the smallest glimmer of trust in her eyes. It was a small victory, but one that meant everything to him. They couldn't stay at the diner forever, but for now, it was a moment of calm before the storm. Jack looked out the window, watching the fog roll in, and made a silent vow to himself that no matter what it took, he would protect Maya. Donovan may have been a cop, but Jack wasn't going to let him win. Not when it came to a child's safety. Not when it came to Maya. The morning arrived colder than expected. The heavy fog that had blanketed the town throughout the night lingered, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Jack glanced around the small diner parking lot, his senses on high alert. The previous night's rest had been brief and uneasy. Maya was still quiet, sitting beside him in the booth, her small frame pressed against the edge of the table. The tension in the air was palpable. They had no illusions that Donovan had stopped searching. If anything, he was closing in. They couldn't stay in the diner for long, but they needed to plan their next move. Jack had spoken to Derek, the lawyer, just moments ago. There was a potential safe house, but it was miles away, deep in a rural area with few roads leading to it. They'd have to take their chances. "We're leaving in 15 minutes, Jack announced, his voice carrying through the room. "We need to move quickly, and we need to stay off the main roads. Donovan won't hesitate to follow the obvious route. We can't afford to be predictable." The bikers, already wide awake and alert, nodded in unison, their engines humming as they prepared to mount up. Jack looked at Maya, who was clutching her jacket tighter around her, her eyes still filled with uncertainty. He wanted to reassure her, to promise that everything would be okay, but Jack knew the truth. They were still in danger. Donovan wasn't going to give up that easily. "You ready?" Jack asked Maya softly, his tone as calm as he could make it. She nodded slowly, though Jack could see the fear in her eyes. She had been through too much already, far more than any child should ever have to endure. He reached across the table and placed his hand on hers. "We're not going to let him take you. You're safe with us. I promise you." Maya didn't say anything in response, but Jack could feel her squeeze his hand, her small fingers clutching his as if drawing strength from him. With a final glance around the diner, Jack stood and motioned for the others to follow. The group of bikers filed out, their boots echoing against the pavement as they gathered their gear. The town seemed quiet, almost too quiet, but Jack didn't have time to dwell on it. They needed to move fast. The engines roared to life, the sound reverberating through the streets, and within moments, they were speeding away from the diner, weaving through the fog as they made their way toward the rural highway that would take them to safety. Jack led the way, with Maya once again riding behind him, clutching him tightly. The rest of the bikers followed in formation, their bikes cutting through the mist like a group of shadows. Every few miles, Jack would glance in his rearview mirror, scanning for any sign of pursuit. He wasn't sure if Donovan had a lead on them yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they'd be caught. His mind raced through their options. They had to keep moving, keep switching directions, keep Donovan guessing. There was no other choice. The safe house Derek had mentioned was still hours away, but they had no other place to go. They couldn't risk going back into the city. As they reached a crossroads in the road, Jack slowed down and turned to his left. The others followed, the bikes turning smoothly as they shifted off the main road. This wasn't a route Jack was familiar with, but he knew the importance of avoiding the main highways. They had to stay off the radar. The road ahead was narrow, winding through a dense forest. Jack could barely make out the path ahead through the thick mist, but he trusted his instincts. He trusted his crew. "Stay sharp," Jack called back to the others. "We don't know what's ahead, but we can't afford to be caught off guard." The sound of the bikes echoed in the forest, a constant reminder that they were still on the run. The further they went down the narrow road, the darker and more isolated it became. The trees closed in on them, blocking out much of the light. Jack glanced at the road ahead, his grip tight on the handlebars. This was the kind of place where you could disappear, where you could get lost in the shadows. But it also made them more vulnerable. As they approached a particularly sharp bend in the road, Jack's ears perked up. He heard it, distant but growing closer. The unmistakable sound of another engine. His heart raced. Donovan was closing in. The bikers were now fully aware of the danger, and the pace quickened. Jack pushed the bike harder, urging it to go faster. The roar of the engine grew louder as the other bikers followed suit, their bikes speeding up as they raced down the path. Jack could feel the tension building in his chest. They were almost there, just a few more miles, and they'd be at the safe house. But the sound of the engine behind them was unmistakable now. Donovan was gaining ground. He wasn't going to let them get away that easily. Jack glanced over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he saw the black SUV weaving through the trees in pursuit. He could feel the pressure mounting. They weren't going to outrun him. Not on this road. Not now. Get ready. Jack barked to the bikers ahead. We're making a stand. We can't keep running forever. The bikers immediately adjusted, splitting into two groups, one to the left, one to the right. Jack prepared himself for whatever was coming next, knowing they couldn't keep running. They had to fight. The forest around them seemed to darken, the trees closing in as the black SUV continued to chase them down. Jack's hand tightened around the handlebars. It was time. They were going to take a stand and make sure Maya was safe, no matter what. His jaw clenched. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The roar of the black SUV grew louder as it tore through the forest, its headlights piercing the mist, illuminating the path ahead. Jack's heart pounded as he pushed the throttle harder, his bike tearing through the dirt road, weaving in and out of the trees. The sound of the other bikers was just as intense behind him, the engines roaring in unison as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. They couldn't outrun Donovan anymore, not in this terrain. The time had come to face him. Jack's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The black SUV was dangerously close, the tires screeching as it tried to catch up. The driver, no doubt Donovan, was determined. Jack could see the faint silhouette of the vehicle through the fog, only a few car lengths away. This was the moment they had been dreading. Get ready, Jack shouted to the rest of the crew, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Stay sharp. We hold our ground here. The bikers adjusted quickly, spreading out into a formation that was equal parts defensive and offensive. Their movements were fluid, practiced. No one needed to ask what to do. They all knew their roles. Maya, sitting behind Jack, tightened her grip around his waist, her body trembling despite the reassurance he had given her earlier. Jack's heart softened, but he couldn't let his guard down. He had made a promise to keep her safe, and he intended to follow through with that promise, no matter what. As the SUV closed in, Jack slammed on the brakes and swerved to the side, forcing the vehicle to take a sharp turn. The tires of the SUV screeched, kicking up dirt as it tried to make the turn, but Jack had already positioned himself between the SUV and the other bikers. The rest of the crew followed suit, splitting into two groups. Some stayed behind to guard the rear, while others took the offensive position, waiting for Donovan to make his move. Hold your ground, Jack muttered to himself, his eyes locked on the SUV. He could hear the rev of the engine as Donovan tried to shift the SUV back into position, but Jack wasn't going to let him get the upper hand. This was the standoff. Donovan was about to learn just how far Jack and the bikers were willing to go to protect Maya. The air was thick with tension, the sound of motorcycles and the engine of the SUV filling the silence of the forest. Jack's grip tightened on the handlebars, his focus never wavering from the approaching SUV. They were in a dangerous game now, and Jack knew that one wrong move could change everything. The SUV finally straightened itself out and sped forward, headlights glaring as it tried to push through the line of bikers. Jack's eyes narrowed. This was it. He revved the engine of his bike and moved forward, cutting through the fog like a predator hunting its prey. The rest of the bikers followed, and they closed in on the SUV, forcing it into a narrow gap between two trees. The standoff had begun. Donovan's face appeared in the driver's side window, his eyes wild with rage. He slammed his fist against the wheel, but Jack didn't flinch. The bikers were no longer just a group of riders. They were a united front, standing between Donovan and Maya. You think you can stop me? Donovan shouted, his voice carrying through the forest. You have no idea who you're messing with. Jack's voice was calm, but the threat behind it was clear. No, you're the one who doesn't know who you're messing with. He took a step forward, blocking Donovan's path, the rest of the bikers following suit. Maya, still holding on to Jack, finally spoke. "Please, don't hurt him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's heart clenched at the sound of her words. He turned his head slightly, looking at her. She was terrified, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. "I won't let him hurt you," Jack reassured her, his voice soft but unwavering. He turned back to Donovan. "You're not getting past us. This is over." Donovan's eyes flickered with anger, but for a moment, there was hesitation. He knew he couldn't win this fight. He was outnumbered, outmatched. The bikers had the advantage of speed, of knowledge, of the land. He might have had the badge, but Jack had the loyalty and the strength of his crew. Without another word, Donovan slammed his foot on the gas, trying to force his way through the gap. But Jack and the others were ready. They moved with precision, surrounding the SUV and cutting off every escape route. Jack's heart raced, but his mind was clear. He knew this was the moment they had to stand firm. No more running. The bike beneath him roared to life as he inched closer to the SUV, blocking its path completely. "Get out," Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. Donovan didn't move, his hands gripping the wheel, his knuckles white with fury. But Jack wasn't going to let this drag on. The bikers were closing in, and they weren't backing down. Donovan's eyes flicked from Jack to the other bikers, and for the first time, Jack saw a flash of doubt in his eyes. "You're finished," Jack said, his voice like steel. Donovan's gaze hardened, but he knew there was no way out. "You'll regret this," he growled, but his words lacked conviction. With a final look of defiance, he slammed the SUV into reverse, spinning the wheels as he tried to break free. But the bikers were already on the move. They were faster, more coordinated, and Donovan was no match for them. As the SUV retreated, Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. They had won this round, but he knew Donovan wasn't done yet. He would be back, and when he did, Jack and the crew would be ready. But for now, they had bought themselves time. They had kept Maya safe for another day. The engine of the motorcycle hummed steadily beneath Jack as he glanced over his shoulder. The group had kept their pace, moving quickly, but the weight of what had just happened still lingered in the air. The confrontation with Donovan had been intense, but Jack could feel a sense of victory in the pit of his stomach. They had held their ground. Maya was safe, for now. The road stretched ahead, but Jack knew the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. He glanced back at the rest of the bikers, his mind already working on their next steps. They had to move fast and get to the safe house Derek had mentioned. They couldn't afford to stay in one place too long. The law was against them, and with Donovan on their tail, there was no telling how much longer they could stay one step ahead. The quiet hum of the motorcycles filled the space between them, but Jack's mind was racing. He'd made a promise to Maya's father, to keep her safe no matter what. It was a promise he intended to keep, but the road ahead was filled with obstacles, and Jack knew there were more challenges to come. As they turned off the main road, heading into more isolated territory, the air seemed to shift. The fog had lifted, but the tension in the group remained thick. Maya was still holding on to him, her small hands gripping the sides of his leather jacket. Jack could feel her fear, and it broke his heart. She had been through so much, but now, with Donovan on their trail, they were stuck in a dangerous game they couldn't afford to lose. "We're almost there," Jack said softly, though he wasn't sure if it would reassure her. He wasn't even sure he believed it himself. They were getting closer to the safe house, but the fear of being caught was ever present. Jack's eyes scanned the road ahead, every mile feeling like an eternity. The quiet of the surrounding forest only added to the unease. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the path ahead. The rest of the bikers remained in formation behind him, their eyes scanning the horizon, ever watchful. They couldn't afford to get complacent. "Keep your eyes open," Jack warned the group over the radio. "We don't know if Donovan has backup, but we're not letting our guard down." As they reached a small clearing, Jack spotted the safe house in the distance. It was an old, secluded farmhouse, surrounded by trees. The house itself looked like it had seen better days, but it would do. It had to. Jack signaled to the group, and they slowed down, maneuvering their bikes around the winding path that led to the house. The place was isolated, tucked away from the main roads, and that made it the perfect spot to lay low. They parked their bikes behind the house, out of sight from the road, and Jack immediately got off his bike, turning to Maya. She had climbed off the bike with him, but her eyes were still wide with fear. Jack could see the exhaustion on her face. She hadn't spoken much since their escape, but he knew she was processing everything that had happened. He crouched down to her level, giving her a soft smile. "You're safe now, Maya. We're going to rest here for a bit. Then we'll figure out our next move." Maya didn't respond immediately, but Jack saw her shoulders relax just slightly. She was still on edge, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack's heart tightened at the sound of her words. He wasn't used to hearing gratitude from a child who had been through so much. He nodded, standing up straight. "We're not done yet, but we've got you. I promise we'll keep you safe." The bikers dismounted and began to secure the area, checking the perimeter to make sure they were undisturbed. Jack stood watch for a moment, scanning the trees, listening for any signs of movement. His instincts told him to stay alert. Even in a place like this, Donovan could still be lurking nearby. They couldn't afford to take any chances. The minutes ticked by, and the bikers gathered in the small living room of the farmhouse, setting up a temporary camp. There was little to work with, but it would have to do for now. Jack sat down at the table, pulling out his phone to check any updates from Derek. His fingers hovered over the screen before he dialed the number. Derek answered on the third ring. "Jack," Derek said, his voice low. "What's the situation?" "We're at the safe house," Jack replied, his voice steady. "But we can't stay here long. Donovan's still out there, and we need to be ready to move again." Derek's voice took on a more serious tone. "I've got some contacts working on getting you out of the area. We'll move Maya as soon as we can. But for now, keep a low profile. Don't draw attention." Jack nodded, even though Derek couldn't see him. "We'll hold tight for now, but we need a backup plan. If Donovan finds us here, we need an exit strategy." "I'll have something for you soon," Derek assured him. "Stay safe." Jack hung up the phone and turned to the group. They were still on edge, but they were ready. They had no choice. As the night fell and the darkness closed in around them, Jack sat back and surveyed the room. Maya was sitting on the couch, looking out the window, her face a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Jack knew she didn't fully understand what was happening, but she was learning to trust him. And for that, he was grateful. He looked at the rest of the bikers, nodding his head in determination. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they had made it this far, and they would fight to keep Maya safe, no matter the cost. The dim light of the farmhouse flickered as the night deepened. The air inside the room felt thick with anticipation and uncertainty. Jack sat by the table, his eyes scanning the old walls of the house, listening to the sounds of the wind outside. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. They had made it to the safe house, but Donovan wasn't far behind, and Jack knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. The bikers had secured the perimeter, their eyes constantly moving, staying vigilant. The few belongings they had carried with them were scattered around the room, and despite their best efforts to stay calm, the weight of their situation was hard to ignore. Maya was sitting quietly on the couch, her small hands clasped in her lap. She hadn't said much since they arrived, and Jack could see the strain in her face. He knew she was scared, and who could blame her? She had been through so much already. Jack walked over to her, crouching down so that they were eye to eye. "Hey, how are you holding up?" he asked gently, his voice soft. Maya looked up at him, her eyes tired but filled with a quiet strength. "I'm okay," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for keeping me safe." Jack's heart tightened, and he gave her a small smile. "You don't need to thank me. You're family now. We'll keep you safe, no matter what." He reached out and gently placed his hand on hers. Maya's grip tightened around his hand, her eyes searching his face as though trying to find reassurance. "Are we safe here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jack sighed, looking toward the window. The sun had set, and the night had settled in, but there was a constant unease hanging in the air. "We're safe for now," Jack said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But we need to be ready. We don't know when Donovan will make his move." He stood up, looking around the room at the bikers who were sitting quietly, alert and ready. "We'll stay here tonight, but in the morning, we move again. We can't risk staying in one place for too long." Maya nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else, trust. She was starting to trust them, starting to believe that they would protect her. And that was a responsibility Jack didn't take lightly. He had made a promise to Tyrone, and now it was his duty to keep Maya safe. Jack turned back to the rest of the group. They were all silent, each one processing the situation in their own way. Bear, Clutch, and the others were seated around the room, their faces set in grim determination. "We need to be ready," Jack said, his voice firm. "We don't know if Donovan has more people after us. Stay sharp. Tomorrow, we ride. We're not letting him take Maya." The bikers nodded in unison. They were ready. Jack could feel the strength of their unity. They had been through a lot together, and now they were more than just a group of bikers. They were a family, bound together by loyalty and the promise to protect. As the night dragged on, the farmhouse seemed quieter, the tension in the air thickening with each passing hour. Jack kept his eyes on the road outside, the occasional rustling of trees the only sound breaking the silence. Maya was sleeping now, her head resting against the armrest, but Jack knew it wasn't real rest. She had too many fears, too many thoughts running through her mind. She had been through too much already. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. He had promised to protect her, but he also knew that the road ahead would be full of challenges. Donovan wouldn't give up. He would keep coming. Jack was sure of it. He rubbed a hand over his face, trying to shake off the fatigue that was threatening to take hold. He couldn't afford to be tired. Not now. Not when Maya's safety was at stake. His mind raced through the possible scenarios, calculating their next steps, but no plan could fully prepare them for what was to come. As the clock ticked on, Jack found himself pacing the floor, his mind restless. He wasn't the only one who couldn't sleep. The others were just as alert, just as ready for whatever came next. The bikers weren't just protecting a child. They were standing up to something much bigger. They were fighting for justice, fighting for a chance to make sure that a little girl didn't have to live in fear anymore. Finally, Jack turned to the others. "All right, we rest as much as we can tonight. Tomorrow, we ride." The bikers stood and moved to get some rest, but there was no real peace in the room. The calm before the storm felt more like a ticking clock. Jack took a deep breath and sat down in one of the chairs. He closed his eyes for a moment, but his thoughts kept racing. The storm was coming, and it would be up to them to face it head on. They had made it this far, and they weren't going to let Donovan take anything from them. Not this time. Jack stood up, looking over at Maya one last time before walking to the door. "We'll get you through this," he whispered, the words more for himself than for her. Tomorrow would be another fight, but they were ready for it. And they would keep fighting, no matter the cost. The dawn had barely broken when Jack stood by the window, watching the first light of day seep through the trees. The farmhouse was still, too still. The silence was deafening, every creak and whisper of the wind amplified in his ears. Maya was still asleep, curled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. Jack couldn't remember the last time he had felt this way. So restless, so unsure. The road ahead was uncertain, and despite the plan they had set, Jack knew that Donovan wasn't done. He would keep coming, and Jack wasn't sure how long they could keep outrunning him. The others were already stirring, their faces showing the fatigue of a long night spent on edge. Bear stood by the door, his massive frame blocking out the light, watching the horizon. The bikers didn't need to speak much to understand each other's thoughts. They all knew what had to be done. "We can't stay here much longer," Jack said, his voice low, as he turned away from the window. "The moment we stay put, we're vulnerable. We move today, before Donovan has the chance to track us down." The others nodded in agreement. They had been on the move for days now, and while they had been successful in keeping Donovan at bay, they couldn't afford to relax. They had to stay ahead, stay unpredictable. The safe house had served its purpose, but now it was time to leave. Jack turned to look at Maya one last time. She was still asleep, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Jack didn't want to wake her, didn't want her to feel the burden of their world. But he knew he had to. It was time to face the reality of what was coming. He walked over to her, crouching beside the couch. "Maya," he said softly, his hand brushing her hair away from her face. She stirred, slowly waking, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, confusion still lingering in her gaze. "We have to go," Jack said, his voice gentle. "We can't stay here. It's not safe anymore." Maya nodded, sitting up slowly. She was still so small, so fragile, yet Jack could see the strength in her growing with each passing day. She had been through so much, but she was still standing. And that gave him hope. As Maya gathered her things, Jack turned to the bikers. "We need to stay ahead of Donovan," he said. "I'm not sure where we're going yet, but we can't stay on the main roads. We'll head into the woods, take the back trails. We need to be smart, be ready for anything." They all prepared to leave. Jack watched as each of them mounted their bikes, their movements smooth and practiced. The sun was barely rising, the cool morning air biting at their skin as they revved their engines, ready to ride once again. Jack helped Maya onto his bike, ensuring she was secure before climbing on himself. "Hold on tight," he said, and she nodded, her small arms wrapping around him. Jack started the engine, the familiar roar of the bike filling the air, and they were off. The rest of the bikers followed closely behind, their formation tight. The road ahead was long, winding through dense trees and mist, a place where they could hide in the shadows, a place where they could move without being seen. They had no destination in mind, only a sense of urgency pushing them forward. The forest closed in around them, the trees towering like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching long over the path. Jack kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't help but think about what lay ahead. They had no guarantees. Donovan could be anywhere, and they still didn't know how many people he had after them. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the other bikers closely. Bear was at the rear, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, while Clutch took the lead, guiding them through the winding trails. Jack trusted his crew, but even with them by his side, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. Maya's grip tightened around him, and Jack could feel her tense up. He wished he could take the fear from her, make everything feel normal again, but all he could do was keep moving. "You're doing great," Jack said softly, looking down at her. Maya didn't respond, but Jack saw her nod slightly, her face still set in that quiet determination. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They were in this together. The trail continued, twisting and turning through the forest, and Jack's thoughts remained on the road ahead. He was doing everything he could to protect Maya, but even he knew that they couldn't outrun this forever. They had to stop running eventually, face Donovan head-on. As they continued down the winding road, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Derek. "I've got a safe house lined up for you. It's a little more secure, but you need to move fast." They're getting closer. Jack's heart sank. It was what he had feared. They were closing in. He quickly typed back, "We'll make our way there. Stay ready." He put the phone back in his pocket and signaled for the bikers to pick up the pace. The sound of their engines grew louder as they accelerated, cutting through the fog. They weren't stopping. Not until they reached safety. Not until Maya was safe. Jack could feel the tension in the air, but he knew they had to keep moving. They were in this fight for the long haul, and there was no turning back now. The sound of the motorcycles echoed through the dense forest as Jack led the way, his mind focused on the road ahead. They were getting closer to the safe house Derek had arranged, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being followed. Every turn, every mile, he expected to hear the screech of tires behind them, the sound of Donovan's pursuit closing in. Maya's grip around his waist tightened, and Jack could feel the tension in her small hands. She was scared, and despite everything Jack had promised, he knew she was still unsure about what came next. "We're almost there," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. Maya didn't answer, but Jack could feel her nod slightly against his back. He had hoped this would be over by now. They had outrun Donovan, held their ground, but Jack knew this wasn't the end. Donovan was relentless, and he would keep coming. They had to keep moving, stay ahead, and stay one step ahead of the law. The forest around them began to thin, and the sight of a long, winding road appeared ahead. The safe house was just a few miles away. Jack slowed his bike, signaling the others to follow his lead. The bikers moved in unison, their bikes roaring as they followed the path that led to the hidden house. The property was isolated, surrounded by dense woods, and the house itself was modest, an old cabin tucked away in a secluded area, but it was secure. Jack had been here before, and he trusted it to be the place where they could finally catch their breath. As they pulled up to the house, Jack glanced around. The place was silent, no sign of movement. But Jack wasn't fooled. They couldn't afford to relax. "Stay alert," he warned his crew as they dismounted their bikes. Maya was the last to climb off the bike, and Jack helped her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "We're safe here for now," he said, giving her a reassuring smile. Maya, still wary, glanced around, but her body language relaxed just slightly. Jack knew it would take time for her to feel truly safe again. The bikers began securing the area, checking windows and doors, making sure the property was secure. Jack turned to Bear. Keep watch. I don't trust that we're in the clear yet. Bear nodded without a word, his eyes scanning the surroundings as he kept to the perimeter. The others helped fortify the area, making sure they had a safe place to rest. Jack went inside the house and moved to the small kitchen, setting down his helmet. The cabin was simple, but had everything they needed. He leaned against the counter, watching as the bikers set up makeshift beds in the other rooms. We're safe here, Jack muttered to himself. But even as he said it, he didn't fully believe it. There was too much uncertainty in the air, and he knew Donovan wouldn't stop until he found them. He had to keep moving. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out, looking at the screen. It was Derek. Jack, we have a problem, Derek said, his voice tense. Jack's stomach dropped. What's happened? Donovan's lawyer is pushing harder than we thought. They're asking for an emergency hearing, and it could move quickly. They're still tracking Maya, and they won't stop until they get her back, Derek explained. Jack clenched his jaw. We can't stay here for long. Derek sighed. I know. I'm still working on options, but you need to be ready to move again soon. Jack closed his eyes for a moment. They were always running. Keep me posted, he said, hanging up the phone. He turned to find Maya, standing in the doorway, looking at him with a quiet intensity. What's going to happen now? She asked, her voice small. Jack walked over to her, kneeling down to her level. We'll stay here for a bit, but we have to be ready to leave when the time comes. We can't afford to be found. Maya nodded, but Jack could see the uncertainty in her eyes. You're not alone, he said, his voice firm. We're in this together. I won't let anything happen to you. She smiled weakly, but Jack could tell that she was still processing everything. He couldn't promise her that everything would be okay. He couldn't promise her a safe future, but he could promise her that he would fight for her every step of the way. The bikers gathered around the small table, planning their next move. They were all tired, physically and emotionally drained, but none of them would back down. They had made it this far, and Jack wasn't about to let them stop now. We ride tomorrow, Jack said, his voice low and decisive. We'll make our move as soon as the sun rises. We'll stay ahead of Donovan, no matter what it takes. The bikers nodded in agreement, each one knowing that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They would keep moving, keep fighting, for as long as it took. As the night settled in and the lights inside the cabin flickered, Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the window. The fear of what was to come still lingered, but there was one thing Jack knew for sure. They weren't done yet. They would keep moving, keep fighting, and they would protect Maya. The promise he made to her father would be fulfilled, and no one, not even Donovan, would take that away.